Hey, welcome to Let It Be. I'm Vanessa, and this is my little corner of music YouTube. It's been a minute since I've done one of these. I've been focusing on some different things, but time to get back at it and do another episode of what I like to call Should It Stay or Should It Go? Where I go through albums in my collection and reassess whether or not I need to keep them or let them go. So it's come up a couple times in the past, what I'm going to do with them when if I get rid of them. And what I plan to do is when I get a good chunk piled up, I'm going to take them to my local record store and try to see if I can trade them in for something I want a little more. So today, the record that I'm looking at, I didn't acquire in the traditional manner. It's not an album that I bought. So yeah, it's a bit of a different story. So the album that I'm talking about today is, of course, the 2023 album by Sparks called The Girl Is Crying in Her Latte. So when it came out in May 2023, I heard it, thought it was all right, and then I kind of moved on with my life. Well, about 6 months later, I was just at home on a normal day and I had a package show up on my doorsteps. And it was a record, which didn't make any sense to me because I hadn't ordered any records and I wasn't expecting anything. So I was a little confused. I thought maybe it was a wrong address, but no, it was a record addressed to me with my address on it, and my name. And it was from a record company, but there was no return address and there was no letter inside when I opened it. And it was this Sparks record. And I was incredibly confused because I never ordered the album. And I wouldn't say I'd forgotten about it, but I hadn't really thought about it in a while. I'd last heard it when it came out and kind of moved on with my life. So it was a little confusing and it took me a little while to try to figure out why they were sending this to me. Like I'd never got an email indicating anything. I never got any kind of notification that it was coming. And like obviously it wasn't promo because it came out beforehand and I don't know why they'd be randomly sending me promo anyway. I didn't even have a channel then. So it was very strange. Anyway, so I traced it back. I kind of thought about it a little bit and I thought maybe that I entered a contest for the album for whatever reason. And maybe that's what it was. And that's still strange because it would have been well before it came. And usually things come a little faster than that in my experience. And usually they tell you you won, but that's the only thing I can figure out. I found in my browser history that I'd gone to a page for a contest for this record before it came out, before I'd heard it. And maybe I entered the contest. It does seem a little unlikely in some regard because usually I only enter contests for records I actually want. But I guess maybe because I hadn't heard it yet, I thought, well, maybe I'll take a chance on this one. That's the only explanation I can have for it, why this record showed up. Still kind of strange that it took so long to get to me, if that's what it was, because it would have been more than 6 months after the contest. And there was no indication that I won it or anything like that. But that's all I got. So anyway, it's in my collection. Um, I mean, I'm not going to complain about free records, but at the same time, it's not really one that I was super into when I heard. So I thought, well, maybe I will give it another look and see what's going on with it. So Sparks is an interesting artist for me because I would not say that I am a super fan. I know that they have a lot of big fans and they're very intense. And yeah, I would say I'm more of a casual appreciator of Sparks. I've heard probably about 10 of their albums over the course of their career, and I've had a varying degree of different opinions on them. Nothing that is like my favorite of all time, but usually I like them to some degree or think they're okay or, whatever. And it's interesting because I grew up not really knowing much about them, but my dad hates them. So the only perspective I had about them for a very long time was that it was pretty negative. So when I found them on my own, it was like, oh, okay, well, maybe they're not that bad. But anyway, so on to this album. And from what I've seen about it, it's one that a lot of fans consider one of their best albums in a while. And I can't really speak to that too much because I haven't heard many of their newer albums. I mostly heard like some earlier albums in like 80s, and the most recent one before this I've heard is from the mid 90s, which I did not like at all. So yeah, I mean, I don't have that context, but at the same time, I still know whether or not I like something enough to keep it in my collection. So that's where I'm coming from here. So overall, one thing I appreciate about the album, on a just to start on a conceptual level, is the variety of styles that they bring in. Each song seems to have its own vibe and style, and they seem to be going all over the place, and that's an interesting aspect, especially where there's so many songs on the album. It's quite a few. And that helps make things kind of bring a good variety and keep it interesting. And it's not something that I'm sure that I remember noticing back when I originally listened to this album the day it came out. So that was kind of a cool observation to make when I went back to it for this. Um, on the other hand, that can also be distracting because when said style doesn't work or isn't one I prefer, then I got a song that I'm not really into. Although on the again on the flip side, that on the good side, that means that if I don't like it, there's only one song like that, and then we're moving on to the next thing. So I don't know. It's an interesting approach and one that I can see being something that bigger fans of the band really appreciate and probably is part of what makes this album stand out over some of the other stuff that's come out, I'm guessing. Um, Sometimes the overly maximalist arrangements can be overwhelming and at times come across a bit obnoxious to me because at times I'm not always sure what to focus on. And that I think just comes with whether or not that's your thing or not, or their approach to that style is something that you're into. And I'm still a little on the fence, I guess, as far as that goes, but it's nothing like that's like a deal breaker or anything. It's just something that I noticed. The lyrics on this album are extremely repetitive on a lot of the songs. And I'm not necessarily a big stickler for lyrics. Because I know some people that makes or breaks any album or song. And it's not necessarily the case if the music is something that I love. Sometimes I can look past that, but it really stood out here. So I guess when something's a little more iffy for me, then it'll really stand out. I wouldn't say again that it's a deal breaker. It's just something that I noticed. Um, and it's something that at times was a little annoying and difficult to ignore, but again, it's not the biggest deal. But even with these things considered, I don't think this is a terrible album by any means. And I think that I totally understand why it would be something that bigger fans of the band are happy with. And it's a good album at this, especially 50 years on into their career. This is all you can hope for sometimes because sometimes later period albums, we all know they're not always the best. So I think that they're definitely doing a lot of really creative things here and they sound good. So that's a win for sure. But for me, as someone who is what I call a casual appreciator of the band and not necessarily a super fan, it's an album that I personally struggle to care to ever hear again because it's not necessarily something I would say that I love. There wasn't really anything about it that makes me think that I will ever return to it unless I have some reason to, like a deep dive or doing something like this. So, with that, that's often a sign that you don't necessarily need to keep an album in your collection, especially when you only have so much space. And I'm trying to build now a collection of things that I love. I'm not trying to hold on to things that I'm like, oh, this is all right, but I'm probably never going to listen to it. So in the end, this album is a decent 3-star album to me. I think it's all right. I think it's a respectable entry into their discography, especially at this stage in their career. But it doesn't really go beyond that for me. And since I didn't intend to own it anyway, it is an easy one for me to say can go. But I wanted to make sure that I gave it a proper revisit and a proper assessment before making that decision because it's good to make informed decisions, especially where I'd only heard it once the day it came out. sometimes things can grow on you when you go back to them. So it's good to know for sure. So as far as the song highlights go, I didn't go through and do a review of every single one because there's quite a few songs, and I think that would probably get a little boring. Um, but I would say that my favorite song on here is Nothing Is As Good As They Say It Is. That one, they bring in some guitars, especially after the first two songs. It felt very welcome. And it was my favorite on the album. It has a bit of more of a power pop kind of pop rock, new wavy kind of feel to it. And I really liked that one because that is a genre that I'm a big fan of. And I probably will get into that more in the future. And as far as least favorite goes, I would say that it would take me for a ride. It was just a little too much going on musically, and at times I felt like the elements were clashing with each other. Melodically, it was a little bit annoying to me. And I think they were going for a bit of like a symphonic metal vibe to some degree, but I don't think it really worked. But that was sort of part of the album, is sort of dabbling in all kinds of different genres, which again, cool idea. And it landed sometimes, but sometimes it didn't. It's just how it goes with that. So anyway, what do you think? If you're a big fan, was this the album that you were hoping for at this point in their career? Or was it a bit of a letdown? I don't know. It's hard to say. I've heard a lot of positive things from fans about it, so that's always a great thing. Just let me know what you think of the album and Sparks in general. And yeah, till next time. Bye.